400 years ago, a renowned French doctor put into writing strange visions that he summoned up by occult means. He believed that they told the future. These are what people call the prophecies of Nostradamus. But I'm not talking about that today. Today I'm talking about 1991. Studio Gainax made a movie called Otaku no Video, a prolific OVA that was a mix of an OVA, a biography, and a documentary. Otaku no Video was initially a biographical look at how Studio Gainax got start, but in its second episode it had some pretty ominous and shockingly correct predictions for global society from 1992 to 2035, correctly predicting the death of their own company, the global war on terror. And now, of 10 years to go until Otaku no Video's final climate change disaster prediction, will all the prophecies of Otaku no Video come to pass? Find out on this episode. Hey everyone, my name is Buster Green, and this is one of the largest videos I've had planned out for a while. So today I want to talk about three things. Originally, this was supposed to be my review of the series Mahou Shoujo Magical Destroyers, or in English, The Magical Girls or Magical Destroyers, a show that initially got on my radar when people online were making out fun of it for how completely unhinged the OP for the show was. Awarding it the worst anime opening of the year of our Lord 2023, and inspired by this, I decided to watch the show, and god damn it, in the one episode I watched, it went from having an incomprehensible OP to immediately grabbing my attention and sinking me into the suplex of despair and madness, as the show kind of reached me on a personal level I wasn't expecting, and I guess I'm trying to work through that. Now, I ended up actually splitting this video in half, and majority of the Magical Destroyers content is actually going to end up in the second part of the video. But yeah, Magical Destroyers is oddly enough the anime that more or less tries to declare and tries to convey the sad information that the never-ending otaku summer of 1982, the absolute period of peace that Hideaki Anno and the modern-day anime industry thrived through, is finally closed and dead. Or at the very least, perhaps it's changed forever, and perhaps that idea is a forgotten memory. So to make all of that make sense, I'm going to have to explain how this all started, and I'm also going to have to review the anime Otaku no Video and go over the collapse of Gainax, because those are also things leading up to this. And those all happened this year, and I wanted to talk about them before, but I didn't get a chance to, but now I'm going to talk about them now, because now I finally have time to do it. And so those things intrinsically tie together and tell this crazy-ass story, and so we begin our story with the story of the Ota-king. And I suppose if we're starting the story with the Ota-king, we need to start the story with the creation of Gainax. Because after all, Gainax is the earliest branch in this timeline. If you've ever seen the dramatization Blue Blazes, this show goes heavy into detail about the founding of Gainax, and that the studio basically formed organically around Hideaki Anno's pure skill and obsession as an animator. According to the legends, Anno could fully animate a detailed car explosion on paper with literally no guidance. Anno's freak abilities were almost immediately recognized by the greater powers that be, which led him to drop out of college to create the Daikon video for the 1982 Sci-Fi Fair in Japan, and then he dropped out of college even more to work on Macross and later just directly worked for Studio Ghibli because his raw talent could not be denied. And although Gainax is a memory, it still lives on in various different ways, which I'll discuss at the end of this video. Studio Gainax was a groundbreaking anime studio created by 7 nerdy friends in college who just wanted to make anime together. Getting rich was not their primary goal, they just wanted to make cool shit. The original Studio Gainax had a massive lineup. It consisted of Hideaki Anno as the lead animator and frontman. Behind him was Yoshiyuki Sadamoto, the character designer, who's kind of famous for original Gainax's lanky yet defined character style. After that was Hiroyuki Yamaga, a director and writer later famous for writing Gunbuster, Gundam 0080, and Otaku no Video, which I will review in this video. After that was Takami Akai, an illustrator and video game programmer who was eventually forced out of Gainax for being a bit too active online and being a bit of a shitposter, which was not cool when the internet was starting out. Behind him was Toshio Okada, the man who declared himself the Ota-king, a plastic model maker turned producer. And then lastly was Yasuhiro Takeda, the company's overall manager. And even more lastly was Shinji Higuchi, who came on later as the team's special effects practicalist and later contributed as a storyboard artist to Evangelion and some other major animes. Gainax sprang up organically from the connection these men had after attending college together, as well as they had from working in the industry together to see their collective goal of just pushing the anime industry forward and creating the coolest stuff they could possibly create, and that they themselves wanted to see. The anime industry was in a bit of a flux in the early 80s because the 70s were mostly goofy kid shit, but then Gundam happened, and Gundam sort of opened the door to more mature anime pathways. It was in the 80s that the OVA boom really took off, seemingly allowing animators to finally work without censorship and being able to work around the Japanese limitations of television censorship and sexual violence in content. It was in this straight-to-OVA atmosphere that Gainax really thrived. Throughout my life, Gainax has been a staple of the finest in Japanese animation. I kinda still don't know where we'd be without it, and even though it's gone, it's not forgotten. Evangelion probably saved my soul. I think I honestly would have killed myself if I hadn't watched Evangelion as a teenager. Evangelion was a fucking lifeline to me in a depressing and otherwise isolating teenage experience. Then there's also Gunbuster, that's wonderful. Nadia was okay. I liked the references to the 1920s, although it kind of fizzled out. Magical Shopping Arcade Abenobashi has been completely forgotten by history, but if you ever watch it, it's got some really dirty RoboCop jokes. Then there was Gurren Lagann that basically starred Studio Trigger. But today we're talking about Studio Gainax, and when you talk about Studio Gainax, there's only one anime that is explicitly about the company, and that is Otaku no Video. Otaku no Video, the artistic pure wish that birthed Studio Gainax in the 1980s, and it's also the only anime that fully declares, or at least acknowledges, the start of never-ending otaku summer. The summer that Macross Do You Remember Love came out, and especially in this first episode, I suppose that's a good enough place to start discussing all that. So now, let's talk about Otaku no Video for a while. Otaku no Video originally released in September of 1991, and then its second episode released a few months later in December. Otaku no Video is probably one of the boldest moves by Gainax, and a move never made by an anime studio before or since, because it's basically the autobiography of Studio Gainax, released basically during their first peak in 1991. Oh, and by the way, I'm about to spoil 1991's Otaku no Video, and if you haven't seen it, go rent it from your local video store or your local library, because it's only an hour long, and you should probably watch it and then come back and watch this. I'm gonna let you know that I originally saw this video shortly after it released in the early 90s, and I think it was one of the first major animes that really got me into anime and showed me how cool being an anime fan could be, but I'm also going to rewatch it today now for this review. Otaku no Video is a story of Ken Kubo, a kind of generic everyman character who slowly gets sucked into the world of anime and then quickly makes that his entire personality. I'm pretty sure you've met people like this. In the first episode, he's basically supposed to be a self-insert character for the audience, but for personal reasons, and especially by the second episode, I find him to eventually become an analog self-insert for Hideaki Anno, who typically was the foreman and center of early Gainax productions, and Kubo's bold declaration of becoming the Ota-king seemingly mirrors the title that Anno himself would eventually obtain simply from his prowess in Japan. The other half of the Ota-king duo is Tanaka, or maybe both of them are actually based on Toshio Okada, who was one of the founders of Gainax, who literally nicknamed himself Ota-king, in such a way that I think some of the dialogue in Otaku no Video might be directly quoted from Okada, or at the very least directly inspired by the man's very soul. Okada also famously used the garage kit sales model explained in the second episode of Otaku no Video to finance the production of some of Gainax's major anime in the 1980s. Otaku no Video Episode 1 starts in current day 1991, with Gainax existing as a somewhat realistic company, a company that sells merch and sort of makes anime, and this company is called Grand Prix in the anime. They don't really explain that, and they just start at the start of the timeline in 1982. The subtitle for this episode is Graffiti of the Otaku Generation. The title sequence surprisingly is similar to what would become standard in Evangelion. In the title sequence, Kubo is dressed like the civilian Amuro Ray, and the heroine of the film, Sato, is dressed like Lum. Everyone else is dressed kind of normally. Also, Sato is hilarious and adorable in the first episode and barely present in the second episode, so that's another reason I don't like the second episode as much. Anyway, yeah, so the story starts in 1982. Back in 82, Kubo is a completely ordinary, totally normal guy, but then he has a chance encounter with a local anime club in Shinjuku, and this encounter pretty much redetermines the course of his entire life. Now, this anime club is instantly recognizable as your typical anime club who quote old shows, collect obscure merch, and they're just like a band of roaming geeks. Otaku no Video is also padded out by these series of slow and boring documentary-style interviews with real otaku from the time. Now, that was sort of interesting in 1991, but nowadays, most of what they're talking about is either very mundane shit or excessively pervy shit, so excuse me if I'm going to skip over the documentary parts. Although recently I have met a couple of people who have discussed this film with me, and I've met some real hardcore documentary fans who actually skip over the anime sections and only watch the documentary sections, which is the opposite of what I'm doing today. Anyway, that's not for me though. I just don't consider the documentary sections relevant to what I'm talking about. So yeah, you do you. You can watch either part and have fun with it. Another story that's playing out in the first episode of Otaku no Video is Kubo's relationship with his girlfriend Yukiko Ueno. Seemingly over the course of this first episode, the two of them drift out of interest with each other as Kubo dives deeper and deeper into his intense otaku hobbyism, and Ueno just has no context for it. She doesn't get it at all. At the start, he and Ueno have a bond that they play tennis together, but Kubo completely gives that up to dig deeper into anime, and eventually Ueno and him no longer have anything in common. If Kubo had been a little bit smarter, he probably should have got Ueno into anime with him. Then they both would have become out-of-shape nerds, but instead he failed to bring his girlfriend along for the ride, and he ended up getting dumped. So anyway, Kubo's walking around his college. A typical summer festival happens, and when he notices Tanaka again campaigning for the anime club at his college, which is not Tanaka's college, Kubo is suddenly drawn deeper into the world of anime. Tanaka is there selling doujinshi and full shark cosplay, and there's some pretty cool anime cosplay cameos that take place in the crowd at the scene. Sato really introduces herself here and shows up in full Lum cosplay again, and then we get a bunch of randos doing Lum, Maytel, Bright, Arale. And also Tanaka says in Extreme Nerd Code that they've been selling perverted hentai of Sayla from Gundam. Kubo then starts hanging out with the anime club. The anime club lives in a small room that is intensely set up to deal with all the kind of nerdy hobbies that would have been present in 1982. They have a VCR, which was a major expensive luxury item at that time. And later, they even point out that at this point in history, only the anime club could watch shows that have gone off the air because of their expensive VCR. Tanaka makes Kubo watch the Daikon video as study material, followed up by Hideaki Anno's cuts from the Macross TV show, which are excellent. The team then introduce Kubo to various parts of nerd pop culture and overwhelm him with stupid and frivolous trivia. They then talk him into cosplaying as Space Adventure Cobra, and then the gang attends their first anime con together with more cool cosplayers and some more BG cameos. Look, there's Gavon. Do you remember Gavon? Anyway, Kubo's relationship with Yoko eventually completely falls apart, as Yoko points out that Kubo's getting more sloppy, more fat, more weird. Kubo invites her to see Unico. Unico is a cringe child's movie that only babies should watch. I'm sorry, Unico freaks me out. Anyway, Unico freaks her out too, and then he mentions that he's more concerned with buying a magazine than spending time with her, and this is pretty much the end of their relationship. He's gotten way too, gross for her. Now, after this, the film jumps ahead 2 years later to March of 1984. The gang is all lined up for the release night of Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind. It's a great fucking night. The anime team is literally camped outside, waiting in the cold for tickets. Now, I need to remind you that March in Japan is basically winter. It's usually snowing at this time of year. And anyway, while they're waiting in the cold for Nausicaa, Tanaka's wandering around trading cells with other extreme collectors. This businessman and this hooker walk over and comment that all these teenagers are ridiculous to wait in the cold just to see Nausicaa because, you could wait a day and see it after it's released and just be comfortable. But no, they're waiting in the cold to see Nausicaa in the Valley of the Wind because that's how much respect they have for Miyazaki at this time. And that's kind of crazy, especially considering how good Nausicaa was. They knew what they were getting. Anyway, out of nowhere, another nerd shows up with a stack of leaked Studio Direct concept art for Macross Do You Remember Love? And they all have a holy grail moment, holy shit moment, and once again directly praise Hideaki Anno for his work on this film. Great job, Hideaki Anno. You contribute to some of the biggest anime films of the 1980s. Now, I gotta say, this moment is so extreme. Could you imagine how crazy it would be in the days before the internet that you're just waiting for one movie when a random guy shows up with concept art for another movie that's not even out yet? This is how you make friends, people. Distribute concept art. I low-key want to cosplay as this guy now and just hand out concept art for Do You Remember Love? I think I'll make a lot of friends doing that. Anyway, the team is gawking at this excellent concept art for Do You Remember Love and somehow being inspired by how cool the future might be, and Kubo stops when he gets to a page with concept art of Lin Minmay, seemingly being drawn into the art of Minmay the way some people would get crazy and go obsessed looking at the Mona Lisa. Now, this is honestly the most important second in this entire anime. I have interpreted the scene in a bunch of different ways, and I'm going to talk first about the way I'm interpreting now, but previously I've had a different interpretation. I want to say Minmay triggers something primal in Kubo, and as an adult with a better understanding of Japanese, I want to say he's triggered by guilt that Minmay reminds him of Ueno, and seeing Minmay reminds him that he and Ueno have drifted apart, and he wonders if their relationship could be saved. However, the last time I watched this when I was a kid, when I was 16 years old, I absolutely interpret the scene as the absolute moment that Kubo gave up on Ueno and decided he was done with her and officially became obsessed with 2D girls, fully obsessed with the sexual idea of Lin Minmay, because he is just fixated on Minmay in a bizarre kind of way that you only really get once you've watched Macross, but Minmay just kind of draws you in forever, but that's a story for another day. The point is, I'm not quite sure what was going through his head at this point, but there was a lot of Minmay in there and a lot of grief and a lot of Ueno, and it's all mixed up and together, and that is the greatest moment of Otaku no Video. Anyway, yeah, that's basically the climax of the first episode. After that, Kubo calls Ueno and discovers that she's cheating on him, or maybe they were never even dating, but nonetheless, a more aggressive man has gone his way into bed with her, gone past third base, and he describes it that she dumped him. Now, he gets super pissed about it because in his view, he did nothing wrong and she just dumped him because of his weird hobbies. Now, I love about this anime is that you can see it both ways. You can see that he was becoming severely neglectful of the aspects of his life in the process. I kind of love that even though it frames Kubo as being justified, it also gives you all the evidence to kind of tell that he's kind of technically at fault because he stopped exercising, he stopped shaving, and stopped bathing. But fuck it, let's just blame the woman. Blame Ueno, you know, that's the 80s for you. Anyway, Kubo gets completely pissed off at her, completely gets pissed off at Otaku are being discriminated against, and declares that he will become the Ota-king, a man who has seen all the anime in the world, and a man who can even make and sell anime. And in my opinion, that would have been a fantastical place to leave off at. I kind of wish the second episode of Otaku no Video doesn't exist, because the first episode was so good, but fuck it, I'll give the second episode another chance. The first episode is just so much better though, because the first episode is a biographical time capsule look into how a man in 1982 became indoctrinated into otaku culture. And with this introduction to otaku fandom mixed with the time capsule of the perfection of 80s Japan, it shows just the start of the otaku boom, how it all started off. The second episode is more about the actual rise of Studio Gainax, but then it goes into some cringy fanfiction positing where Gainax would go into the future. And even though a lot of that was kind of way off base, actually now that I compare things side to side on like what they predicted and when they thought it would happen, it's kind of closely right on the money. Or at least it does come pretty close to the major handicap of some events happening usually 2 years off from when Otaku no Video predicted them to happen. Anyway, so episode 2. This episode starts with Tanaka and Kubo putting together a business called Grand Prix to produce garage kits. Garage kits, if you don't know, are resin models. They're like model kits, but they're a lot more expensive because you have to like supply the resin, you have to build the mold. There's so much more work, and they're really for the most obsessed of obsessed collectors. Also, screw it, I figured this is a good time for another side story. So back in the 90s, after I first saw Otaku no Video, I eventually did come across a garage kit I wanted, and it was, believe it or not, the B Club Nightingale kit, which was back at the time in the 1990s the only way you could get a 1/144th scale model of the Nightingale. And you can apparently still get this kit, and it costs like $350 now, but like I'm pretty sure it also cost $350 in like the 90s, so it really hasn't increased or decreased in value. However, thankfully now there is a 1/144th HGUC Nightingale, which is only $100, and I haven't bought that either, but at least I'm happy that exists because that seems like it's actually like doable. So yeah, they start selling garage kits and magazine, then eventually they sell enough that they can open a store. They fill their store with otaku merchandise, and then they franchise the store, and then they all become rich. They use the money to make anime, and that's essentially how Gainax got its start in the 80s. They mentioned that in 1987, Wings of Hanamaise came out. That's included in the film. I recently watched that film for the first time. I thought it was a little bit bland, but I do respect the world building that they did in that movie. Anyway, then Kubo declares that he wants the Japanese otaku to have a safe space. He ups the ante that he wants them to have an entire otaku theme park like Disneyland. And he also wants to get revenge on Uno, so that's all tied together. Anyway, Grand Prix slowly becomes more and more of a big deal, and he becomes more and more cutthroat as this band of ordinary college friends turn into a merciless corporate boardroom. Kubo then makes various seedy deals with the Chinese Communist Party to cheaply produce otaku toys in China for a tidy profit. Now, doing this eventually causes the kit market to collapse, so Grand Prix redirects from focusing on the Japanese market to focusing on the international market. This actually did happen in mid-90s Japan, ironically 2 years after the OVA came out. So once again, Otaku Videos Episode 2 sort of creepily predicts the future, and 9 out of 10 of the things they predicted have come to pass, with one still not come to pass only because it's a prediction for 2035. Anyway, then Kubo is forced out of the company by some bastard named Kanda, who's also the guy who married Uno. And despite his friends knowing how wrong and dirty this is, none of them are brave enough to stand up against Kanda, and they all let Kubo be fired because they're afraid of him and they're just trying to save their own butts. So Kubo gets laid off, then a few months later Tanaka gets laid off, so he and Kubo realign with each other and basically create the whole company all over again from the ground up. This is also something that did also happen to the real Gainax about 10 years out from this moment. Now this time around they focus more heavily into the production of OVAs and tokusatsu, and damn it, I bet if I had made my OVA in 1991, I could have made a fortune selling it on VHS like this. Anyway, the second company they make is called GX in the anime, but it's basically Gainax. They make a cutie honey sort of anime called Misty May. It seems to be the weird missing link between the Daikon video and Nadia and the Secret of Blue Water. I kind of really wish this was a real anime because I kind of want to watch it. They eventually make enough money selling anime that they're able to move on to making tokusatsu films, which once again is what the real Gainax did, eventually filling Tokyo Dome with their movies. And by 1997, they put the original Grand Prix out of business, destroying Uno's family and rebuying them out just to be spiteful, before finally achieving their goal and opening Tokyo Otaku Land in 1999. Now, it's a little unclear how exactly Tokyo Otaku Land springs up in this anime, or what exactly it does, but it seems to just be a theme park with rides based on like Ultraman, Macross, Kamen Rider, etc. It's posited as being either a direct rival or a replacement for Tokyo Disneyland and Chiba. Now, in the real world, there's never been a dedicated otaku land, with the closest thing being the equivalent of Fuji-Q Island Park. They have a handful of Gundam, Evangelion, and Gegege no Kitaro rides. And then there's also Universal Studios Japan. That has leaned into and away from anime throughout the years, although Universal Studios Japan didn't open until 2001, nearly a year after the prophesized opening of Otaku Land. So once again, Otaku Video hitting it with the predictions. Now, the second episode has a surprisingly on-the-nose forecast of when the era of the otaku would end, with the series proposing a massive status change happening in the world around 1999 due to an outer space waste disposal explosion. Now, ironically, while that prediction hasn't happened, the date and the predicted cultural change does eerily line up with 9/11 and the world's slow descent into a global fascist security state. Now, when the series finally does end in 2035, still another 10 years beyond our current future, a world with commonplace space travel, and a world where the melting polar ice caps has put most of Tokyo underwater. The promised Otaku Land is now deep under the sea, and the old otaku return in the Alvin submarine to the site of Otaku Land simply to revisit their youth, while rocking immaculate Yamato and Gundam cosplay down to the bottom of the ocean, an act that was later mirrored by Daisuke Inamoto, a Japanese millionaire who went on a space trip dressed as Char. Oh wait, I'm being told now that Daisuke Inamoto didn't actually go to space and demanded a $21 million refund for the price he paid to go into space. Wow, I don't know if he got it. Anyway, there still hasn't been a Char cosplayer in space. However, later, Soichi Noguchi did go up to the International Space Station dressed as a crew member from Space Battleship Yamato. Anyway, inside Otaku Land, Tanaka and Kubo see all their old friends again aboard the main deck of the Space Battleship Yamato, and seeing them all instantly makes them turn young again. They launch the Fusion Yamato Macross Gunbuster off into deep space with a singular goal to spread anime across outer space. The ship then turns into the Atragon from the movie Atragon, and the movie ends on a triumphant note. Ironically enough, though literally contemplating the collapse of Gainax now, the major beats discussed in Otaku no Video all basically one by one came to pass, except for the melting of the polar ice caps in 2035. It's not 2035 yet, is it? Oh god. Anyway, let's talk about the death of Gainax now. So yes, one by one, those 7 miraculous friends, the friends who founded Gainax, were replaced by our soulless corporate overlords. By the time Otaku no Video had even come out, almost half of the founding members of Gainax from 1982 had already retired. Aside from Anno, most of them were now part-time members or had split off to found their own studio. After Otaku no Video, Nadia and the Secret of Blue Water came out, and that was moderately successful, but then the studio finally hit it big when Evangelion came out. Evangelion was the most successful anime of the 1990s, and it made Gainax filthy stinking rich with multiple lucrative licensing and merchandise deals. There was even a joke in Japan that you could actually live off of exclusively Evangelion licensed products. However, behind the scenes, Gainax continued to be mismanaged. In 1997, and shortly after the Cinematic triumph of End of Evangelion, the company's then president Takeshi Sawamura and his accountant were both arrested for tax fraud for embezzling all that sweet Evangelion money, and they were sent to jail for that. A new president was instated, and seemingly a few years after this, Anno finally got fed up with the studio's mismanagement and completely left the company to found Studio Kara completely by himself, primarily to oversee the continuation of the Evangelion franchise. And then Studio Kara has eventually grown into Anno's home base, the base for all his future endeavors. And Kara, in many ways, is everything that Gainax was supposed to be without their dirty layer of shameful history. The studio wasn't beat though. After this, they released Gurren Lagann and they had another resurgence. However, once again after this, they alienated the creators of Gurren Lagann. In 2011, Hiroyuki Yamaisha and Masahiko Osuka got fed up with Gainax's crap and left on their own to start Studio Trigger. A number of Gainax's most heavy talent bled into Studio Trigger, and Studio Trigger's creation was pretty much a death blow to Gainax, with the company barely able to continue proper production. The situation only got worse, and in 2015, Gainax itself started splintering even more. Now, I've heard some alternative opinions about why exactly this split took place, but long story short, Gainax split into various smaller Gainaxes, and this was kind of a shell game move so that various staff could be moved around, various producers could be moved around, and various debts could be moved around, with an overall goal of subtracting and transplanting pieces to make one Gainax full of debt and problems and one Gainax that was still a functional company. Now, the functional company here was a sub-company split off from the main Gainax called Fukushima Gainax. Fukushima Gainax was originally just set up as a tourist trap to draw tourism to the tsunami-devastated Fukushima region, but ironically, Fukushima Gainax ended up becoming so successful that Fukushima Gainax is still around. They just changed their name to Gaina and completely disowned their history with Gainax. But I would say that they are the third and lastly most valid of Gainax's 3 successors. But either way, at this point, the original Gainax has now splintered 3 times into 3 major studios. There's Kara and Anno's team, Trigger and Imaishi's team, and Gaina with everyone who's left. And with everyone who's left in Gaina, that left no one in Gainax. Gainax was completely unable to produce anime after that. Now, unfortunately, this also left one unfinished project behind. And this is a project that I've only recently found out about for this video, but everything I found out about sounds freaking great. So the last unfinished Studio Gainax project was a 3-part movie series called Zero Century, based on Leiji Matsumoto's cinematic universe. This was initially planned to be a trilogy of movies released in 2020, 2023, and 2024, telling a 3-part Rashomon-style mystery crossover story told from the perspective of Queen Emeraldis in the first movie, Captain Harlock in the second movie, and lastly, in the third and final movie, Maytel and the Galaxy Express 39, which, damn, that sounds fucking amazing. I would have loved that movie. But unfortunately, that's another thing for the lost unfinished media pile. And with Gainax now gone and Leiji Matsumoto dying a few years after the project was announced, I really have to wonder if this will ever come to pass. Now, anyway, after this, Gainax was its absolute weakest. They begged Anno for a $1 million loan to keep themselves afloat, and begrudgingly he gave it to them, without interest, which is just unheard of. Nonetheless, the company was still being kept afloat by this loan and its ability to create merch, its still barely existing garage kit market, and its still existing licensing and royalties from the Gainax back anime catalog. Unfortunately, as in the 90s, Gainax was once again being led by corporate raiders and idiots. In 2019, nearly 10 years after the arrest of the first Gainax president on tax fraud, Gainax's then representative director, Tomohiro Maki, was arrested and sent to prison for 3 years for a slew of sex crimes, where he had apparently taken advantage of several young aspiring actresses and tricked them into taking nude photos. Now, this led to a pretty major public outcry, ironically against Hideaki Anno, who was just blamed for it. See, he had to lay down the law, but what was going on was everyone kind of assumed that Hideaki Anno was the president of Gainax because, like, the headline was like, Evangelion Studio commits crimes, and, you know, Hideaki Anno ran the Evangelion Studio, even though that was Studio Kara, not Studio Gainax. There was a lot of, like, shenanigans, and it took, like, a long time to, like, explain it all. So, yeah, he was, like, pissed off. He didn't even work there at this point, and he had to set the record straight. But anyway, it still took another 4 years after that for Gainax to fully declare bankruptcy and cease to exist. After all the sloshing around of money, after all the bleeding of staff, Gainax finally fully collapsed in 2024. Its legacy fully tainted. Full control of the company was finally transferred to Hideaki Anno because of the studio's outstanding debt to him. And now with control of Studio Gainax, Studio Kara decided to extremely generously break up the company's assets and split the legacy IP and return it to whoever created it. That meant returning whatever was created by Gaina back to Gaina, whatever was created by Trigger back to Trigger, and returning whatever lingering IP Gainax was sitting on to the people who originally created it. Which is overall a great thing because now we can finally get more episodes of Gunbuster and Panty and Stocking. Wait, are they actually making a third season of Gunbuster? They say they might, but I don't think they will though. Okay, this video has been going on for over 30 minutes, and I'm going to leave this at a cliffhanger here because apparently a majority of my subs can't handle a video where I talk about both Otaku no Video and Magical Destroyers, and the downfall of Gainax. So come back for part 2, where I'll be mostly talking about Magical Destroyers and its impact on otaku culture. Alright, thank you guys. I was me, Buster Green. Good night.